everyone, it's AJ, or should I say top of the morning. It's something to do on a Saturday, and with St. Patrick's Day right around the corner, I'm going to share a family favorite Irish recipe with you. It's not only delicious and festive for St. Patrick's Day, but this is one that you can serve up anytime. This is Irish pound cake, or commonly known in my house as Irish whiskey cake. Yum! Don't worry, one of the first things I'm going to share with you is that most of the alcohol when you're baking will cook out of this, so it's not terribly dangerous. You could leave the whiskey out altogether and then just have a spice cake, but what fun is that? We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the science behind baking, so you're going to get a little bit of an education out of this, and we're going to do a delicious topping for this that if you really want to enjoy St. Patrick's Day, you're going to love the topping. So go ahead and grab that bottle of Irish whiskey and we'll get started. Did you know the reason that pound cake is called pound cake is because originally it called for a pound of flour, a pound of butter, a pound of sugar, and a pound of eggs. And that would attribute to a lot of pounds. But we're not going to use quite that much today, but we're going to make a delicious pound cake that's going to be just, it'll put on a couple pounds, I'm sure, but well worth it. So the recipe that is going to be attached in the comments today calls for self-rising flour. I don't normally keep self-rising flour on hand because I use flour to make a lot of bread. And you don't want to use self-rising flour for bread. We'll talk about that in another video. So I have my regular all-purpose flour. There is a super simple solution to making your all-purpose flour become self-rising flour. Self-rising flour is actually cheater's flour. It already has the baking powder and the salt in it. And of course, these are crucial for your chemical reactions. Remember, even if you're trying to cut back on salt, when you are baking, anytime that you are baking and want something that's going to have a rise or a lift to it, you need the salt. Baking is science, it's chemistry, so you need that salt. Make sure that you don't cut salt out when you're baking. And baking powder. Did you know the difference between baking powder and baking soda is that baking soda actually needs another chemical alkaline to go with it, so it reacts. Baking powder already has baking soda in it and something like cream of tartar, so it will simply react with water, whereas baking soda will need something like a vinegar in order for it to react. And they're both, of course, leavening agents that come back and give us that lift. So because I don't have any self-rising flour, I'm just going to throw my baking powder in here and my salt in here. And if you need a quick substitution for that, it is, I wrote it down, that for every 1 cup of flour, you need 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And that's for every 1 cup of flour. And so I'm just going to mix that in there so that we now, right before your eyes, have invented self-rising flour. How awesome are we today, right? Yay! No, I promise I haven't been touching the whiskey already. So, the first thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that your cream cheese is softened, your butter is softened, because yeah, we're putting cream cheese in this too. I told you this is pound cake. And your eggs. And the reason that you want your cream cheese and butter to be softened is when we whip them, it's automatically going to very easily cream. It's going to have a much easier time breaking that down. That is the same reason that a lot of recipes call for your eggs to be room temperature, because they have less viscous is how they describe it. But the warmer that your eggs are, the thinner, the more easily they will mix into the batter, and that's what we want. Because the other thing we want to always make sure that we're doing is never over mixing our batter, because the longer that you mix flour, the more gluten that's released, and the tougher or the chewier, the less lighter and the less airy your mixture is going to be. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to throw our cream cheese and our butter into our mixer and whip those up. So let's get started. To add our sugar, we're just going to slowly let that combine in, and then we're just going to mix it until it starts to change color once we've added all the sugar. Next we're going to add in the eggs, and I like to crack my eggs into a measuring cup first. I never want to do it over the batter just because you never know when you're going to get a shell or something's going to be not right with the egg, and then you're going to have trouble with your whole batter. So I always like to break mine into a measuring cup or a bowl. So we're going to add the eggs one at a time until they combine with the butter mixture. Once one egg is combined, then we can go ahead and add the next egg. And we're just going to slowly add our room temperature eggs one at a time. Now that the egg is combined, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of flour. It does say to add 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour and then 2 cups of self-rising flour, but this will be okay. And at this point now, once we add the flour, again, we want to just add it and mix it just until it's combined. Because if you over-mix your flour, and I'm going to turn this down so we make it a mess. There we go. Again, that's what makes things tough and chewy, and we don't want that. And then once our flour is well mixed, we will add our nutmeg, our vanilla, and our, I've lost my nutmeg, and our whiskey. Add our nutmeg. Now some of the recipes will call for mace. This original recipe did call for mace. Mace is basically the same kind of thing as nutmeg. It's taken from the outside shell. So they're pretty much interchangeable, but nutmeg is kind of a powerful little thing, as is mace. So if you're not used to it, make sure that you only use a little bit, because it is powerful. It's one of those flavors that you either like it or you don't. And of course now we are going to also add our whiskey. That smells good. And once we get that just mixed in till it's combined, we are ready to put it into the pan. And we will be using a bundt pan, and the reason that a lot of recipes call for bundt pans is because the density of the batter or the dough. And in this case it's very heavy, as we well know, hence the pound cake, right? That smells good. So with your heavier doughs, your inside tends to not cook as well or bake as thoroughly. So with a bundt pan with that hollow center, the heat and the air are allowed to circulate through there, and then will thoroughly cook the batter. So if a recipe calls for a bundt pan and it's a rather heavy ingredient, in this case, you know, we do have a lot of butter, a lot of eggs, a lot of cream cheese. Those things will all be very heavy. And that is why it requires a bundt pan. So again, that heat and that air can circulate around that. And I so want to lick this batter right now. Yum. Yum, yum, yum. Oh, it smells delicious. You know, I can't wait until they invent like smell-o-vision, so that, you know, when you're cooking, you can actually smell something, because this smells wonderful. And I will tell you that the recipe calls for whiskey or bourbon, A popular one is Jameson's, and that's a good one to use. I am very partial to the maple whiskeys, and I think it just kind of gives this pound cake an extra unique flavor. It's absolutely delicious. So I actually have maple bourbon in mine. And again, for the cake recipe itself, or any time that you're using alcohol in your cakes, a good majority of the alcohol will burn off with the heat. Not all of it. And it depends what source you consult will tell you how much of the alcohol content stays in it. So depending on where you're at with that, or who you're serving this cake to, may depend on whether you keep it all for yourself or share it. This is probably not one that I will share with the grandbabies, and definitely not once I get the topping on here, because the topping is extra celebratory, let's say. It's a festive one for the holiday. So I'm just going to spoon my batter, or spatula my batter, into this baking pan, and then before I put it into the oven, I'm just going to let it sit for a few minutes, or let it rest. That's always a good idea anytime, whether you're making a boxed cake mix or cupcakes, muffins, to let the batter sit once it gets into the pan, just to kind of settle. Because as you're spooning it or scooping it in there, air pockets form, and then that's how you get uneven cookness, or sometimes your cakes will even fall because of the air pocket and as the air moves. So it's a good idea to give it just a few minutes to rest, let it settle before you put it in the oven, and you'll actually get a better lift or a better rise to it. I suppose that I've scraped all I can scrape out of here, and that'll leave me a little bit of bowl to lick later, right? So we now have our cake batter in the pan, and just going to smooth that out just a little. And so again, we're going to let this rest for just a couple minutes, about 2 to 5 minutes. Then we will put it in the oven to bake. And my cake is out of the oven. It is done. We have checked it with a toothpick, and I highly recommend dense cakes such as pound cakes that you do the toothpick test. I know there's the touch test where you poke it with your finger. If it bounces back, then it's done, and that's fine for box mixes and cupcakes. But with a cake such as this that is dense and moist, a lot of times, if it's moist as it should be, when you poke it with your finger, that indentation is going to stay there. It's not going to bounce back as quickly. And you don't want to wait till it bounces back, because that means it's overcooked, and you don't want to overcook it because you don't want a dry pound cake. But even if your cake comes out a little dry, the topping that we're about to whip up will fix that. So we're going to let this sit for about 10 minutes before we flip it over and let it cool completely. And while we're doing that, we are going to make our topping. So we have melted our butter over the medium heat. We're now going to add our sugar, and we're just going to whisk that in. Once we get our sugar whisked in, we are going to add our water, a tablespoon of our whiskey or our bourbon, and I put a little bit of vanilla in there as well because, I just like it. And now I'm just going to whisk our walnuts in there as well. And we're just going to, oh, that smells delicious. We're just going to move this around for about 3 to 5 minutes on medium heat. Just kind of keeping that all together. And remember, for an extra tasty flavor, toast your walnuts first. It's always important anytime you use nuts in a recipe to toss them lightly in a little bit of oil and toast them in the oven for about 3 to 7 minutes. It just kind of brings out the flavor in them. And especially with walnuts, if you pre-toast them, it means they're going to get good and cooked in the recipe, and it really takes the risk out of having that bitter flavor that sometimes walnuts can have. So it's always good anytime you're going to use walnuts or pecans or almonds to just take that couple extra minutes to toast those nuts up, because it really does make a difference in your recipe. Just kind of like that homemade vanilla, those little extra steps really make a difference, and it'll give your recipe that it'll make people go yum when they eat your food. That's what you want. You want to be able to share your dessert or your meal with somebody and you know, have them really enjoy it. So you can see around the edges, hopefully you can, that it's starting to get a little foamy, and that's what we want. We want that brown sugar to foam up and to get kind of thick. It's going to make almost like a caramel sauce. So that's actually what the sugar is doing, is starting to caramelize. And it's just looking delicious and fabulous and smelling wonderful. It's going to be just tasty over top of our cake. I can't wait. Yum, yum, yum. So once I brought my sugar to kind of a frothy boil, I went back and added the rest of the bourbon and brought it to a second boil. And now we've got this nice frothy syrupy mixture that will be ready shortly to pour over top of the cake once it cools a little bit. So while that foam kind of settles, I'm going to go over and loosen our pound cake and get ready to glaze it. So I've chosen a plate that has kind of a high edge to it because our glaze is a little liquidy. So if you use just a regular plate, sometimes you can end up with a little bit of runoff, and we don't want that. And I'm just going to carefully take my butter knife and run it right along the side of the pound cake. I like to do this no matter how confident I am that it's not going to stick, simply because, especially with a pound cake, you have a lot of egg, a lot of sugar in there. The potential for it to stick is very high. The other thing that you don't want to do with any cake is realize after you have it inverted that part of it is sticking. That's where you really run into the problem of trying to salvage your cake. And there are ways to do it. I should do a video on that, kitchen rescue, because I've screwed up many a times. So once I think that my pound cake is pretty well loose from the sides, as much as I can get it, I'm just going to grab my plate. Yeah, I can do without it. I like it to be cool enough that I can do without oven mitts. I feel like I have a better grip. So I'm just going to lay my plate right on top of that, flip it over, and hope for the best. Are we hoping? Ooh, I feel sticky. Uh-oh, I feel sticky. So, if you feel sticky where it's not coming loose, the best thing you can do is flip it over and try again. So I'm going to go back around here, and I might have let it cool just a little too long. And this time I'm going in the grooves of my bundt pan and trying to reach up underneath my cake. Okay, because I really feel like that's where it's sticking, is up on the top. So I'm going to go along the grooves in my bundt pan and just kind of lift up just ever so slightly on the knife as I go, hopefully kind of loosening that cake and not breaking it. And I'm thoroughly convinced that's how they came up with frosting for cakes anyway, is it stuck to the pan, it broke, and somebody looked for a way to hide it, and thus now we have lovely whipped creams and buttercream frostings that are delicious. I'm going to go around the center just a little bit here. I hate to do this because I really think that this increases your chances of breaking your cake, but this could also be where it's hanging on, so just gonna, I say gently, but I'm not being very gentle. Okay, so fingers crossed, we're going to try it again. Are we there? Are we there? Are we there? I feel a little better this time, do I? I feel like this is one-sided, maybe. Hey, there we go. All right, and there we have our bundt cake. So now, before our bundt cake completely cools and our lovely glazed mixture has set up too thick, and I don't know if you can see this. Let me try it around so that you can see this, because it's even though you can't smell it or taste it, you can see we now have this nice caramel thickness, looking very good, smells delicious. And we can now go right over top of this cake. And I don't trust myself enough to not make a mess, because I'm a disaster. So I'm going to use my measuring cup that I measured out my sugar in and scoop it so that I have a little bit more control over how my glaze goes on here. And if your cake were to stick or break, you could always add a few more nuts, whip up a little more glaze with a few more nuts and kind of fill in whatever stuck, piece it back together. You could also go ahead and do a confectioner's icing over top of it, which is just a little bit of powdered sugar and some milk and some flavoring. There's lots of options to kind of glue your cake back together or hide the imperfections. Or, if you didn't have a lot of ingredients on hand to do that, you can always slice your cake and arrange it on a pretty plate already sliced, and just the the part that didn't come out, hey, nobody needs to know. That's snack time for you, right? Oh, this stuff smells amazing. So now that we have the cake pretty well coated, we're just going to let it sit, because what's really wonderful about this is this pound cake now will continue to absorb this sort of liquidy glaze. That's what's nice about the glaze as opposed to a frosting. Not that I don't love a good frosting on here, and there's some excellent recipes out there. In fact, if you're going to be able to serve your cake, there's a lovely whipped cream and butter frosting out there that is delicious. But this will definitely soak up that moisture, and you'll have this moist, delicious cake, which is really good. So remember, you don't have to be Irish to enjoy this pound cake, and it doesn't need to be St. Patrick's Day. You can brighten up any day with a delicious pound cake. And if the glaze isn't your thing, maple cream cheese frosting also goes really well on this cake, and so does whipped cream right out of the tub if you want to save yourself a little time. And some good news, without the glaze, this cake freezes really well too, so you can pack it up and save it for later. If you enjoyed this video today, please like, comment, and share so that your friends can become our friends, because we always want more friends. And until next time, be safe, be well, and I will see you real soon.